Hello everyone, my name is Nikhil. So in this module, we will learn about the pages pre-rendering inside the Next.js, and we will have a look on the static site generation, the incremental static generation, and the server-side rendering. So now, what is the pages pre-rendering? So inside the Next.js, the pages on the website is first generated and then shown to the user. But what does that mean? So the data is fetched from the server once and then sent back to the component, and then only the component function runs. So this is the cycle of the pre-rendering, and unlike React, the data is also available inside the HTML file inside the page source. That makes a big advantage over the React application because the content is also available in the initial render, and it is best for the SEOs, and it is best choice for the SEOs because you have the data in the HTML source, and in the React there is no any data in the HTML source, and all we can see is the div ID equals to the root, and the content is dynamically updated on time. So in the Next.js, we don't see any loading state or any loading spinner while rendering the page, and the SEOs are very good with the pre-rendering. So this make a big advantage for the Next.js over the React. Now we will see the forms of the pre-rendering. So the first is the getStaticProps, which means that we need to statically generate the pages, and it is also known as the static site generation that we know. So we statically generate the pages and pre-render the content onto that web page, and then we don't see any loading spinner or any other state as well. So it is the most used and the best approach only if you know about the pages in your application. So you should know about the pages in your application that know, because it serves the possible instances of a page. Like some pages are frequently visited, so you know that this page would be frequently visited, so you can just statically generate that page, like for the home page, like for the about us page, the contact us page, and for like featured products on the website. Those pages are frequently visited, so you can just pre-render that pages with the getStaticProps. And then if you have some static data to show on the website, which is only required to fetch from the server once or not frequently, then you can use this getStaticProps, and it is the best approach. So now we will dive deeper into it by just creating a new Next.js application directly from the scratch, and then after we will move on to the second form of the pre-rendering once we need it. So now we will dive deeper into these getStaticProps, and then we will have a look on the incremental static generation as well with the getStaticProps. So now let's dive into it. And now I'm into the VS Code, and now we need to just create a new Next.js application directly from the scratch. So the command to create the Next.js application would be the npx. It would be the create-next-app, and then after that we need to enter the name of the application which we need to install. So it can be the my app. So after then, if you will press enter, so the Next.js app will be then installed within very few moments. And now you can see the Next.js app is now installed, and now we can just move on to the directory. And now you can see now we have the pre-generation folder, and inside that we have the my app which is just installed. And now you can see now we have the next folder which is used for building the Next.js applications. And then you can see now we have the node modules folder which is used for the packages. And then now you can see we have the pages directory which is used for the routing, and then we have the public directory, and after then we have the styles directory. And now we need to just move on to the index.js inside the pages, and after that we need to remove the content inside this div because we don't need them at all. So I will now remove this, and now we need to remove the class name as well from there, and now we need to just remove the styles import as well. And after that we need to just delete the home.module.css as well because we don't need them at all. And then we have the index.js, and after that we can just render here the hello. And now we can just start the development server on our machine. So for that we need to just move on to the directory into the my app, and then npm run dev to compile and to run the application. So after this command there will be a local development server which would be running at the port of the 3000 in our machine. So let's hit enter. So now you can see the server is started and ready into the localhost at the rate 3000, and after that we can just move on to the localhost 3000. And now you can see the localhost 3000 is open, and now you can see now we have the hello inside the web page. So everything is working perfectly fine. So now we have just created a fresh Next.js application, and now the first thing which we need for the static generation to add the data. So we need to add the data into a server. So we can just get the data from any server, but the preferable choice would be add the data to the Firebase. So we can just move on to the Firebase, and then we can just add the data to it. So for that we can just create a JSON file here for now, and it will be the temporary file. And after creating the JSON file, then we will import the JSON file inside the Firebase. So for that, inside the public I will just add here the JSON file, it will be the dummy.json. And after that, now we need to add some data here, like we can add a project name as the bookstore. So we can just have a JSON data here, and it can be a books, and it will be an array of the books. And after that, we will have multiple objects inside the array of the books. Like we can have the object, and it will have the name property of the book, and the name can be the mindset. And after that, we can have a description of the book, and after that, the description can be the mindset book. And after that, now we can just have the ID of the book as well. So the ID can be equals to the 1. And now we have this object, and now we can just copy this, and now we can just paste it few more times. And after that, we have 3, 4, 5. So now we have 5 books inside the database. So now we can see, now we can add some commas here as well. And after that, we can just change the name, like it can be the Atomic Habits, and the description can be the Atomic Habits book. And after that, the ID would be the 2. And then same for the third ID. So it can be the rich dad, poor dad. And the ID of the book will be the 3. And then we need to change the description as well. And it can be a rich dad book. And then after that, we can just change the fourth ID as well. So it would be the ID equals to the 4, and this would be the ID equals to the 5. And after that, we can just change the name as well, like it can be a make money, and the description can be the make money book. And after that, we can have a last book, like it can be a love, and after that, it will be the love book. So now we have just created a books array of the JSON data, and then we can just move on to the reveal in Explorer. And after that, we can just move on to the Firebase. So we can just search for the Firebase here. So to the Firebase, and after that, you will see there will be a link of the Firebase. And now you can see we have the Firebase, and the Firebase is like a no code backend which you can use because it doesn't need any code. And this is a fully flexible backend which you can use without writing a single line of code. So you can just use Firebase for the data. And then after that, you can just move on to the go to console, and then you can just create a new Firebase project from there. You can just click on the add project, and then you can just start the name of the project as well, like it can be a Next.js. And then after that, you can just confirm, and then you can just click on the continue. And after that, you can just turn off the Google Analytics as well because we don't need them at all. And now we can just move on, and then we can just click on the create project button. So it will just create a Firebase project for us. So we have to wait till it just create a new Firebase project for us. And the Firebase project is now ready, and then we can just click on the continue, and then the project will be open. And now we can just move on to the real-time database inside that. So we can just click on the real-time database, and then there will be the option to create the database. So we have the button, and then we can just click on the create database button, and then you can just have a default settings, and then you can just click on the next. And then you can see now we have two options, the start in the locked mode and start in the test mode. So now in the locked mode, the read and write would be the false. And now we can just move on, and then we can just click on the start in test mode because we need to test the application. After that, you can just click on the enable button. And now this will be the URL of the API which we need to call. And then after that, we can just click on the 3 dots here, and then we have the option of the import the JSON file. So we can just click, and then we can just import the JSON file that we have just created. So now we have just opened this, so we can just move on the dummy API.json into the Firebase. So now we can just drag the file here. So now you can see now we have the dummy.json file, and then we can just click on the import. And after that, the data would be then imported within a few seconds. So now you can see the data is now imported, and then we have the books data here, and then we have some array of the data inside that. We have the array of the objects of the data inside that. So we have the 0 field, which we have the description of the mindset book, and then we have the ID equals to the 1, and then we have the description which has the Atomic Habits book, and then we have the ID equals to the 2, and then we have the description 3, description 4, and then the description 5. So now we have just created the data. And now we can just move on to the application. And now we need to just build the routing here. So for the routing, we need to move on to the pages folder, and now we need to just remove the dummy JSON file here as well. So now we need to move on to the pages directory, and then we have the index.js file. And now we don't need anything inside the index.js. So I will leave it empty. And now we can just move on and declare a new folder inside the pages. It can be the books. And after the books, I will now just create a new file. It will be the index. Next.js. And after that, I will now create a new file as well for the dynamic ID of the page. It will be the id.js. And if you don't know about these dynamic IDs, dynamic routing inside the Next.js, so I have a video recorded for that. So I will put the link inside the description so you can just check that out. And after that, we can just move on to the index.js, and then we can just add here the function. So it will the function, it would be the book home. And then we can just have the function, and then we can just return something inside the function as well, like it will be the books. And after that, we can just move on, and then we can just export default this function as well as the book home. So now we can just save, and then we can just move on to the localhost 3000 again. And after that, you can just move on to /books, and then you will see there will be a books there. So now we can see, now we have the books. So now we have just created the folder structure of the routes as well. So now we need to add the content for the pre-generation of the data. So for the static site generation, it means that we can first statically get the data from the server and then load the page and then show it to the user. So it's very good approach given by the Next.js, because it will have to even fetch the server-side code before the component runs. So we don't see any loading state or a loading spinner or the loading text of the data. And the big advantage is that the content is also served inside the page source, which is best for the SEOs, which was missing in the React applications. So let's start. So as we have discussed inside the PPT, so we have a function called the getStaticProps, which will run the code on the server side and not on the client side. So it generates and returns the props for the component that we want to use. It is as simple, and it only runs on the server side, so you can say inside the node environment and not on the browser. So for that, we need to just create this function. It would be the export, it would be the asynchronous function, so it will be the async function, and it will be the getStaticProps. So now we have just created this function, and after that we need to just run the server side code here. So for that, either we can just fetch the API here as well. So we can just fetch the API data from there, from the Firebase here only. So for that, we can just move on, and then we can just have here the good folder structure for that. So we can just move on, and then we can just generate a new folder. So it can be my app, and then we can just have here the folder can be a utils. And after that, you can, in the utils, we can have the folder as the API-utils.js file. And now inside this file, we will now have a function to fetch the data. So it will be the export, it will be the async function again, and it will be the get books, and then this would be the asynchronous functions. So we will add a promise handling here as well. So now we will fetch the data here in this function, and then we will use that data inside the index.js. So it will be a very simple approach. So we can just get the data as the const, it will be the books, and it will equals to the fetch function from the JavaScript, which is available inside the JavaScript only. So we can use the XCOs as well, but now the fetch is already available in the JavaScript, so we can just use the fetch as well. And now we can just get the URL of this data. So we can just copy this URL from here, firebase.com, and after that we can just paste the URL here, and after that we have the URL, and now you can see we have the slash here, and after the slash we need to add the JSON here as well. So now we have the books file, now we have the books. So the name of the data would be the books.json. So it is Firebase specific, so we can just have a books.json, and after that we can just close this line. And in the fetch, because it is an asynchronous task, so we can just await for the data as well. And after that, it would not be the books, it will be the response. And after that, we can just get the data from the response as well. So it will be the data, and it can be the await again. So we need to just convert the data to the JSON as well. So it will convert the response to the JSON. So now we got the data inside this data variable, and after that we can just return the data as well from there. And now we can just move on, and then we can just go to the index.js, and inside that we can just have here the data. And now we can just use that function here in the getStaticProps. So for that, we can just have here the const, it will be the books, and it will be equals to that the function that we have just created, it will be the get books. So it will be the get books, and because it is also an asynchronous function and it is also a promise, so we can just add a await here as well. So now we have just created this function as the await get books. So now we got the books inside this books. So now we have got the books, and now how can we return some data which will just available inside this book home component as well? So we can just have here the return statement, and inside the return statement we need to return an object, and this will always be an object. So make sure you are sending the object inside the return, and inside this object you need to add the props key. So it is the Next.js specific, so you need to add the props, and after the props there will always be object, and inside the object you can just send any data. Like I can send the name, and the name can be equals to the Nikhil. So if I will now save, and if I will now just get the props here, so we can just destructure the props here only. So we got the name, and it can be the name only. So if I will now save, and if I will now just move on to the books here, so if I will now refresh the page, so now you can see, now you got the name as the Nikhil. So we can just send any data from the props here. So now what this function is doing, it is just creating a async function as the getStaticProps, and it is running before the component function, and it is just getting the data from the server or any API, and it is running into the server side only, in the Node.js only, and not onto the browser. So this is how this function is executing. And after that, when we got the books, we can just send the books here. So we can just have a key of the books, and then the value can be the books as well. So now we are sending the data as the books object here, and now we can just move on to the name, and then we can just have here the books here. And after that we need to render all of the books here, so we can just remove this h1, and then we can just have here only the div, and inside that div now we will add the books. So we can just have an ordered list, so we can just have a ul, and inside that we will have an curly braces which in an expression, and now we will just map through all of the books. So we can just have here the books dot map, and then we can just add here the variable also. So we can just have a book, and now we need to return something. So we need to just return here the li for the list item, and after that we can just have here the list item, and inside that list item we will have a div again, because we have a lot of data. So we can just have here the h1 tag of the name of the book. So we can just have here the book dot name, and after that we have the description as well. So we can just have here the book dot description, and after that we will have the, so the description would be in the paragraph tag and not in the h1 tag. And after the description, now we need to add the link here. So for the link, we need to just click on the link, and then we need to just move on to the different route, and it would be the ID. So for that we can just add here the link. So after the paragraph we can just have here the article tag, and inside the article tag then we will have the link from the Next.js. So we will just import the link from the Next.js after that. So after the get books, so we can just import the link. It would the import, it would the link, and we need to import it from the next/link. So we have the package of the links. So now the link is now imported, and now inside this link now we need to add here the ref prop as well. So in the ref now we need to move on to the ID of the book as well. So for that we can just have here the ID. So we can just have a book dot ID. So now this will be open inside the /books/the ID of the book, and inside this link we can just add here some text, like we can just have a go to book, and after that we can just save. And if I will now just save, and if I will now just move on to the browser, if I will now refresh the page, now you will see, now we got all of the books inside this web page. And now you can see this is very simple. So we are just creating the getStaticProps, and then we are fetching the data from these books, and then we are just returning the props with the books, and then this function is giving the props to the book home, and then this book home is using these props to make this possible. This is just, we have created the books onto the web page. And now if you will click on the page source, if you will just move on to the source page, click on the view page source, and now you can see, you can just click on the line wrap. Now you can see you got all of the books and all of their description as well inside this page source as well. So now this is very good for the SEO if you have the content, like if you have some content and if you want that content to be available inside the search engines as well. So this is very good approach for that, because in the React tab you don't see anything like this. You just see a HTML, and then you just see the div ID equals to the root, and after the root you just dynamically add the content inside that root only. So now this is the very big advantage of the Next.js, which is the static site generation. So the site is statically generated, and you can see the content is also available for the Google search engine as well, which is very good for the profitable websites. So this is how we have just created. Now we have seen the getStaticProps, so we can see the summary and we can see the workflow as well of the getStaticProps. So when does this function executes? So the getStaticProps runs during the build time, and it generates the pages that we want to pre-render, and then we can just open any page from where the content is served. And it is known as the static site generation. You can see the SSG, where the content is statically loaded during the build process and not during the runtime. So we can't send the request from this function during the runtime or after it is deployed to a server. So now you can see, now we have just created the getStaticProps. And now we are able to fetch all of the books, and we are able to pre-render all of the books inside the web page as well. And now you can see, now we have the link as well for the go to books. So we can just move on to the ID page, and then we can just generate a component function here as well, like it can be the book detail. So now we can just work on this component, and inside that we can just return something like it can be a paragraph tag again, it can be a book detail. And after that we can just export this function as well, export default, and it will the book detail. So if I will now just save, and if I will now just move on to the browser, if I will now just click on the go to book, and now you can see we have a 404 page. But why? I think we have done some mistakes. So we can just move on to the index books, and now you can see inside this link it will not be like this. So we need to add it inside the strings, and then it would be inside the expressions as well. So it would be dynamic, and after that we need to add the slash as well, books and slash this ID. So we can just save again, and then we can just move on to the browser once again. So we can just refresh, and now you can see now we have all of the books. And once I will click on the go to book, and now you can see now we are getting into the book detail page. So now everything is working perfectly fine. So this book detail page is working for every route after the book slash ID. So it's a dynamic route. So now we can just fetch the book from this ID as well, and then we can just show the data inside this page as well for every book. So for that we can again move on to the getStaticProps. So we can just export the function again as the getStaticProps, to the getStaticProps, and after that we need to just fetch the data from this ID. So for that again we need to move on to the API utils file. So as we are getting all of the books from this function, so we can just create another function, and then we need to export this function as well. So it will be the export async, and it will be the function of the get book from ID. And inside this function we will just receive a parameter as the ID. So we will just fetch the book from this ID. So as we are getting all of the books inside this get books, so we can just get all of the books from these books here. So it will be the books, and it will be equals to the await, and then we need to get all of the books from there. So it will be the get books from there. And now in this books, now we got all of the books that are available inside the database, and then we need to just find the book which matches this ID. So for that we need to just create a variable as const. It can be the fetched book, and it will be equals to the books that we are receiving, and it is an array. So we can just use the find method from the array to find the book from there. So we have the array.find, which will find the book from the given condition, and then we can have a condition in the callback, and we can just caveat the book, and after that we can just fetch the condition. So the book.id should be equals to the ID that we are receiving inside the parameter. So now we are just finding the book. So we are finding the book which has the ID, the book.id equals to this ID that we are giving here. So now we have the fetched book, and now we can just return the fetched book from here as well. So it will be the return as the fetched book. And now we can just move on to the ID, and after that we can just move on, and then we can just call this function. So we can just have a const book would be equals to the fetch book from ID. So we can have a get book from ID, and then we need to pass the ID. So where can we get this ID? So that's a big question, and we need to get deeper that how can we fix that problem. So how can we get this ID? Because we all know that the getStaticProps runs before the component function runs. So we cannot use the use router hook from there to get the ID of the parameter, because it runs before the component function runs, and it runs on the Node.js and not on the client side. So we can just get the ID. So even the use router won't work. So how can we do that? So by default inside the getStaticProps we get the context object inside that. So we get the context, and inside this context you have all of the features of this function, like from where you're calling this function and all of the features, even the URL parameters as well. So for that we can just destructure a property from there. It will be the params. So we get the params property from there, and then we will just have the params.id field which we are getting inside this getStaticProps. So this is the solution for it. So we get the book and then we just fetch the book from this ID, and then we have the params object, same as in the use router, but it runs on the server side. So we get the params, and then we have the params.id inside the get book from ID. Now we need to just return this book from here. So we need to just return the props, and inside this props, now we need to just return the book would be equals to the book. So we can just use the ES6 destructuring as well. So we can just remove this book colon book, and then we can just render the book as well. So now after this, now we can just destructure the book from here as well in the prop. So we can just have here the book, and then after that we can just have here again the div, and inside this div we will have the h1 tag. It would be the book dot name, and after that we'll have the paragraph. It would be the book dot, it will be the description, and after that it would also be the paragraph. And now we are getting all of the details. So now we have declared the getStaticProps, and then we are fetching the book from the ID, and then we are returning that book, and then we are using that book inside the book detail props, and then we are rendering the data. So if I will now save, and if I will now move on to the application, now you will see there is an error. But what is this error? So the error is saying that the getStaticPaths is required for the dynamic SSG pages, which is the static site generation pages, and is missing for the book/id. So we have the book/id page here. So what does that mean? So the Next.js doesn't know that how many instances of this page, of this book, or you can say of these IDs, this file handles. So how many instances in the IDs this file handles? This can be 4, this can be 5, this can be 100, this can be thousands. So it doesn't know that how many instances this page file will handle, and it means that statically it doesn't know that what ID it will get inside this params object. So it also doesn't know that what ID will it get inside the params object, because it is not running on the client side. It is running on the node environment in the server side. So we need to tell Next.js that for these IDs, you need to pre-render and pre-generate the content of this page. Like for specific IDs, you can pre-render the pages. So we have the getStaticPaths function, which is written there, which is required, which gives Next.js the paths for which it can statically generate the pages. But how does that work? So we just declare a function, and it can be export, it can be a function, and it will be like getStaticPaths. So this is the function, and after that we need to tell Next.js that for this instances, for what instances we return there. So we will return here the IDs like this. So we will just return here some IDs, and then the IDs will go to the getStaticProps, and then it will receive inside the params object. So it will fetch the ID from the params.id, and for those instances only it will pre-generate the page. So this is the relation. So now we can just send here some IDs, like we have the return statement, and inside this return statement we will just have the paths. So we need to send here the paths for the URL, and it will be an array of the objects. So it can be an array, and then we can have the object. So we can have the params property, as we are sending the params here, and then we are receiving here. So we need to send the params, and this will be an object. So we will be an object, and then we'll pass the ID field to the params as well, as we are receiving there. And make sure the ID here and the here should be the same, because now we are giving the ID, so it should be same. And after that we need to give the ID, and the ID can be a simple string. For now, if I will now give the ID equals to the 1, and after that I think we need to just add the fallback as well, and we will get to the fallback later. I will now just give the fallback equals to the false, and we will get to the fallback later. So if I will now save, so now what it is doing, so the getStaticPaths is now returning some static paths on the URL, which is the params equals to the ID1 after the book. And after that this params object will go to this params, and then it will grab the ID from this, and then the ID equals to the 1. So it will just fetch the ID where the book ID equals to the 1, and it will just pre-generate and pre-render that book page into this id.js page file. So this is how that works. So if I will now save, if I will now just refresh the page, I think the serializing the dot book return from the getStaticProps, I think there is an error. Please only return the JSON. I think there is an error. So the error can be, we can just see what it is. So we are sending the getStaticPaths, we are sending the static paths to the URL, and the fallback is equals to the false, and then we are just fetching the book from this ID. This is So this should be await because this is an asynchronous function and this returns a promise. So if I will now save, so now if I will now refresh now you can see without refreshing the page, and anyways, so now we got the detail of the book as well. So now what it is doing, so now it is doing that for this instance of this page only, it will just statically generate the page. Like for this ID only, it will just statically generate the page. But if we move on to the other page, like if we move on to the localhost 3000 / if I will not just move to the ID 2, then it will not generate the page. Now you can see now the 4 of 4 is true, because now the page for this ID is not pre-generated, or pre-rendered during the build process. So this is how the Next.js working. So now we need to send all of these IDs to this getStaticPaths. So for that we can just get all of the books again. So we can just get all of the books, or it can be a books, and it will be equals to the await again. So it will the get books from there, from the API utils file. And after that we need to just create here a structure of the array where the params will be equals to all of the IDs that are available here. So for that again we can just do const, and it can be a paths object again, and it will be equals to the books dot map. So the map returns an array, so we'll use map, and then the book will be the callback parameter. And after that we will just declare a structure. Like after the book we will now return an array. So for the return we need to add here the rounded brackets, and after that we need to return an object inside that, and object will contain a params, and the params will contain an ID inside that object only. So after the params also we need to add here the object, and the object will contain the field as the ID, and the ID should be equal to the book dot ID. So this is the structure that we have just created. So we have just created the paths array, and then we have just mapped the books, and then the mapping returns an array to the paths, and then we are just giving the structure of this. Like we have the params ID equals to this, and the params ID equals to the book.id. So now we can just move on, and then we can just remove this, and then we can just have here the paths only to the getStaticPaths. So if I will now save, if I will now refresh the page again, I hope it works. So please pray to the God. So now we can just refresh the page, and after that if I will now go to the first book mindset, if I will now click on this URL, now you can see the mindset book is open. And if I will now go back, and if I will now just click on the second book, go to book, I think this should also works. So now if I will now click that, so now you can see the atomic habits is also working. And if I will now just click on any of the book, like if I will now click on the love book, click on that, and then you will see this page will be then opened within very few moments here. So now you will see the love book is now open. So this is how the getStaticPaths and the getStaticProps relate. It will just send the params object inside the ID, and then the ID inside the params, and then it will get the IDs, and then it will generate the pages for these IDs only that we return here inside the parent books. So we are now giving around 5 IDs here. So it will just only generate the page for the 5 IDs. So this is how the getStaticProps and the getStaticPaths is working. So now we have just completed the application with that, with the getStaticProps. And now comes to a topic with the incremental static generation. So what does that mean? So now we have just created the application with the getStaticProps and the getStaticPaths. So now if I will now just build this application, so we can now stop this server, and then we can just have here the npm run and build. So we can just click, and then it should build the application for us. And now you can see now the build is created, and now you can see the SSG is there, and for the SSG we have the filled dot with that. And then you can see for the books and the books page and the book/id page, we have the static generation of the websites. So this is how it works. So we add the static sites into the web page, but there is a problem. But what is the problem? Because the getStaticProps only works during the build time and not after that. So if I will now just move on to the application, and if I will now just start the application for the build, now we need to run the command as the npm start to start the build version. So we can just hit enter to start the production version, and then it will be started onto the localhost 3000 again. So we can just refresh the page again, and now you can see now all of the books are there, and now all of the books have the pre-generated pages of their IDs. So if I will now click on the go to book, and now you can see it is very fast now. And now you can see if I will now just go to book this, now you can see there is that poor that, and now everything is working perfectly fine. But what is the problem then? So if I will now just move on to the Firebase again, the Firebase into the console of the Firebase into the real time. And now the thing is that if I will now just add one more object inside this books object, like if I will now just add one more object inside the books, and after that we needed to create the modification as well, because we have given the structure of the array, but the Firebase has the by default structure of the object. So we need to just create some object here as well after that. So we can just create a one more field, and the key can be equals to the 5, and the value will be equals to an object. So we can just give an value. So we can just give the JSON data again. So we can give the name, and the name can be equals to again the new book, and after that we can give the description, and the description again can be the again new book, and after that we need to provide the ID, and the ID can be equals to, so how many IDs we have given? We have given 5 IDs, so the ID will be equals to the 6 in this object. So the ID equals to the 6. So if I will now just click on the add, and now I have just created a new book for there as the 6th book, as the new book. And if I will now just move on to the localhost 3000/books, if I will now refresh the page, so now you will see nothing will happen, because the site is already generated and we cannot add any book after that. So it is good if you have the static content inside your website, but if you are just adding new request after that to the server, then the static site generation alone will not work. So we need to add the incremental static generation after that, which will just send the request to the database after a number of seconds. Like we can have the 60 seconds, we can have 120 seconds, even we can have after a day. So if you have a website like that, like the content will update after a day only, so you can just have the static site generation with the getStaticProps, but with the incremental static generation. So you can just add a key as the revalidate inside that. So in the index.js, I think you have the getStaticProps, and after that you need to just get something there. So now after this props, you need to add the revalidate here, and the revalidate key would be used, and after the revalidate you can give the revalidate equals to the 10 seconds. So what does that mean? So now next time when we build this application, so after every 10 seconds after the application has deployed, so after every 10 seconds it will send the request to the database to get all of the books. So this is the incremental static generation that we can use here, and after that we can just restart the application and we can just rebuild that. So we can run npm run build, and now you can see the build is now created, and now you can see there is one more option as the ISR, which is the incremental static generation, in which we uses the revalidate key, which will just send the request after the number of seconds that we pass here. And after that you can see now we have the ISR inside this books page as well. So if I will now just start the build again, npm start, so it will start the production build, and then if I will now just refresh the page, and now you can see the new book is there as well. So everything is working perfectly fine. And if I will now just move on to the Firebase again, and if I will now just add one more book here, so it will be the key can be equals to the 6, and the value we can add another object here. So we can just click the drop down, select a new object, and it can be the name field, and the name can be a test again, and then we can send the description, and the description can be again, it should be inside the commas, and then after that we can add description like test description, and after that we can just have here the ID, and the ID would be equals to the 6 now. So if I will now save, and if I will now just click on the add, so now the Firebase will add new product inside that. So now after 10 seconds it will just send a new request to the database. So we have to wait till 10 seconds, and then we will just refresh the page, and now you can see now I have tried after 10 seconds, and now you can see now we have one more book inside the application, which is test again, and then you can see now we have the test description, and then we have the go to book option as well. So now everything is working perfectly fine, and now we have just made the use of the static site generation, that how does that work and how will it handles the static routes and the static paths and the static file generations. And then we have just created the incremental static generation as well. So it will just send the request after every 10 seconds to the server, because we have given the revalidate to 10, and then it will just grab all of the latest data from there. So now we have completed this static site generation, but one thing is missing about this fallback prop that we have just used inside the ID. So what does that fallback means? So in the fallback, if we give the fallback equals to the false, so it is saying to the getStaticPaths that that if we have new paths, like if we don't have that paths inside that, so we need to return the 404 page. So if there is a false and if the path is not there for this route, for this book, so it will return the 404 page. But if the fallback is equals to the true, then if it doesn't find any path related to it, it will not result in a 404 page, but it will just check again and again for that route, and it will give you a fallback content like loading or anything with that. So this is the relation between the fallback, false and true. So now we have just created the getStaticPaths with the getStaticProps and all of the things with the incremental static generation. So this is all about the getStaticPaths and the getStaticProps and the incremental static generation. So now we are pre-generating all of the books which are available inside the database. But is that a good option? Like if you have millions of products into your database, millions of books, then would you pre-generate all of those million pages inside your application? So I believe no, because that can be a big performance issue and the load time could be much bigger than this. So because if you are running a website like Amazon, Flipkart, and there you cannot pre-generate all of these pages, and even the incremental static generation won't work because it will build the app again and again after the app is deployed. So if the data is changing very frequently, then it will just build and generate in a loop. So there can be a big performance issue in the application and the load time can be much longer. So what can you do? So here is a solution again. So we have the getServerSideProps inside the Next.JS, which is a server-side rendering technique. And then what it does? So it is a type of function which runs on every new incoming request. Whenever there will be a new request from the client to the database, it will generate a page from the server and pre-render the page to the client. Very simple. So to pre-render page on every new request, we can use getServerSideProps. And this also works inside the server side and the node environment and not on the client side. So a new request is made and then this handles new request, and we also don't even need to use the static paths because it is very dynamic and it runs on every incoming request. So it gets all of the data with that. So now we will use the getServerSideProps. So now we are into the application again. And here inside the ID, like now we have the ID page, so there can be millions of IDs, so we cannot pre-generate the page for every ID. So now I will now just comment it out, and then now we will use the getServerSideProps instead of this. So I will now remove this and I will now just use the getServerSideProps. So the structure would be the same: export async function, and the function would be getServerSideProps. So now this is a function, and now we can use this function from there. And in this function, now we need to just get all of the data as we are getting from there. And we are also getting the params. So we have to get params as well. And after that, we can just have here the const book will be equals to get book from ID. And then we can just pass here the params object dot ID field inside that. And after that, we will get the book. And then again, we can just return this book from there. So we can just have here the return as the object. And inside the objects, we will have here the props, and inside the props, then we will send the book. So we'll send the book to the book. So if I will now save, and if I will now restart the application again, npm run dev, if I will now just click enter, so now the server is started on the localhost 3000. So if I will now just move on, if I will now refresh the page, and again there is an error because we didn't add the await here. So if I will now just save, and if I will now move on to the application, so now you will see it is running on the server side. And now you can see once we are moving to the book/1, so it is working. And once if I will now just move on to the book/3, so it will also work. Now you can see it is also working. So now it will work on every incoming request, and it will get the params object as well, in which we get the ID, and all of the things will now work perfectly fine. And even if we add new page inside that, like if I will now just move on to the localhost 3000/books, I will now remove everything from there. And now you can see now we have the test again as the last book. So if I will now just add another book from there, from the books, click on plus, and then we can add new book. So the last key was 6, I will add the 7. The value would be equals to an object, and inside that object we will add the name, sell like crazy. And after that we can have a description, and in the description we can have some description as well, like sell like crazy book. And after that we can have the ID as well. So we can have the ID, and the ID can be equals to this 6. So if I will now save, and if I will now just click on the add, So now the new book will be then added to the database. And now you can see, if I will now just refresh the page, now you can see now we have the sell like crazy book here as well. But how? Because now inside this index.js we are using the getStaticProps and not the getServerSideProps, and the getStaticProps is running after every 10 seconds. So it is now pre-generating the page after every 10 seconds. And then if I will now just click on the go to book, then this page will then move to the server side, and then it will just render the content from the getServerSideProps. So this is how that works. So if I will now just click on the page source as well, and now you can see in the page source, now you can see now we got the new book as well. So we are getting the content inside the HTML as well. So everything is working perfectly fine. And then you can see new book, again new book. And even if we go to the make money, go to book, and if I will now just click on the page source, now you can see now we will get all of the things inside the page source as well. So everything is working perfectly fine, and the make money is also there inside that. So the content is available in the HTML as well. So the SEO is powerful. So everything is working perfectly fine. So now we have made use of the getServerSideProps, getStaticProps, getStaticPaths, and the incremental static generation. So almost the course of the Next.js is now complete. So now we will see that which form to use and when. So we saw that the getServerSideProps gets run after every new request is made to the application. And about the getStaticProps, the getStaticProps is ran at a build time, meaning when we run the npm run build, when we build the application, then static pages are built, and then the getStaticProps are called, and then it pre-generates some pages. And about the server side, in the server side props, we don't know what the outcome will be, and we don't know that what the user wants before they make a request. So we can see which form to use when. So for frequently visited pages, like we can have a contact us page, about us page, home page, we can use the getStaticProps. And then for loading a page only on a request sent by the client, we can use getServerSideProps. And make sure you are using only one technique in a component. Either you can use getStaticProps and use getServerSideProps, but you cannot use both of these forms in only one page or in only one component. So make sure you do that. So now we have completed this module as well. So now we will see the summary. So now we have completed the static site generation inside this application, and then we have also completed the incremental site generation, which we have given the revalidate key to revalidate after every couple of seconds. And then we have also built the static paths generation by giving the getStaticPaths props to that. And after that, we have also created the server side rendering. So we have completed all of the forms of the pre-rendering data inside the Next.js. So this is all about this module. So thank you for watching the video, and I hope you will like the video as well. So please subscribe to the channel as well, so that I can be motivated to post the videos like this. So thank you so much.